Not only is Xavier Worthy the fastest wide receiver in the class, he's also just one of the best. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $200 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. On today's show, we are breaking down I'm going to say my favorite player in this class. Not the best player, but my favorite.
No, Marcus. We know your favorite player is actually Rome Odunze. So let's not.
Well, it's close between these two. I had trouble sleeping last night because I was so excited.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just so fired up. So let's talk about Xavier Worthy, who ran a ridiculous 40 at the NFL Combine. You guys all know this by now. We're going to talk about his dynasty value. We're going to talk about player comps. But what did you see when you watched him on tape, Kate?
I mean, Marcus, you see speed, and there's no question why. Obviously, as you just alluded to, broke the NFL Combine record. We're at a 4.21 40-yard dash, 1.49 10-yard split, 41-inch vertical, 10-foot 11-inch broad jump. That is all 90th percentile or above. And we always say don't double count the combine stats because we already knew that Xavier Worthy was such a explosive and speedy player. So again, can't double count that, but it was great to see that what you saw on tape in this speedy, smooth wide receiver, albeit tiny one, really translated to the combine testing. And we kind of got that official confirmation that everything we saw on the field translated to the testing.
Yes. All right, let's go through his strengths and weaknesses because he's pretty easy. He's fast.
You know what he is.
He's fast and he plays fast. And everything he does is based off his speed. You can see the way that he runs routes is based off his speed. Defenders have to give him a lot of cushion. He can make plays down the field. He can make plays after the catch. And I think one of the big things for me here is that he is a natural receiver. We see a lot of these players that come in that run the full, 4.35 or faster, who just aren't natural receivers. And I'm not going to throw these guys under the bus, but like Anthony Schwartz, who the Browns drafted in the third round, he was a track athlete playing football. Xavier Worthy is a football player. Like if he ran a 4.44, he would still be the NFL receiver because he is a natural guy. He can get open. He can catch passes. He has no problem running a full route tree. That part of his game is really, really nice. Now, the weaknesses are pretty well defined as well. He's small. Like, he's just not a very big guy. He came in at 165 pounds at the NFL Combine. I believe he actually plays a little bit heavier than that, but I think he wanted to really try to break this record. And I think the difference for me in Xavier Worthy compared to some of the other receivers that we've seen like this, like I'm going to give you an example. Wan'Dale Robinson, who was not quite as fast, but Wan'Dale Robinson was really good at taking on contact and being able to make plays after contact. That's not really Xavier Worthy's game. He's not somebody that's going to bounce off tackles. He's not a Deebo Samuel. He's not Tyreek Hill that way. He's going to run by guys rather than run through them. And then the catch radius is small. I mean, he's not a very big player. He's going to body catch a lot of passes. Doesn't mean he has bad hands or anything, but he's just not somebody that you're going to be throwing contested catches to, or you want him, trying to outstretch with his hands, like just not part of his game. But I really like him, Kate.
I mean, I think that's fair. All of the things that you mentioned, the natural ability as a wide receiver, I really like the comparison here. Like we've talked about, some of the route runners in this class that maybe are more athletes than they are necessarily like natural route runners. Like I think that's definitely not the case, but
I
it
think
is
Brian
really
Thomas is a
hard.
good example. Like Brian Thomas is not a
Yes.
route runner. He's an athlete. But he's such a good athlete that it doesn't really matter right now.
Yeah, and Xavier Worthy, I think, boasts the best of both worlds, really.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I mean, it is really hard to get over the height, weight, arm length. I mean, all of those metrics, 27th percentile or lower. Hand size, he's got 8 inch and 8 and 3/4 inch hands.
They're
Like
small. Small.
pretty much everything about his frame is incredibly small. So what I do think is a plus for Xavier Worthy is that, that's never been the crux of his game is being more physical than his opponents. Like, because he's not
No.
going to be able to do that at the next level. He wins with speed and he creates separation with speed. My only question is, do you think it's going to translate in the same way once he hits a football field with some of the fastest quarterbacks in the world?
Yeah, I do. Because he's not just straight line fast. And I think that's the difference between him and so many of these other receivers. Like he does a really good job of changing his speeds to create lanes for him to run after the catch. He knows how to differentiate his speed. He's got also great acceleration and quickness. He's the total package when it comes to a speed receiver. And yeah, I do think it's going to be an advantage because he's not always going to be matched up against cornerbacks. You're going to try to get him where he's on the move and he's getting matched up one-on-one against a linebacker in open space, or where he's the over route. Now you've got him against the safety. So yeah, I think his speed, especially if you can put him like in a dome on a fast track, is absolutely going to translate to the NFL.
I like the sound of that. Again, I'm more hung up on the size, which I think like that is really the only knock that you can give Xavier Worthy. It's the size and it's the play strength, which I think in a big way stems from the size. Now, on the plus side, he's not like the tallest wide receiver in the world, but he's 5'11. He's not like,
He's not 5'7" or 5'8". Like
yeah. So like
he's not Tutu Atwell that way.
exactly. So what is a plus is that at the next level, if he wants to bulk up, which, I don't know necessarily that he'll want to bulk up because again, his game is sort of speed, but if he does want to put on some muscle, that might help with the play strength. Like you can't help height, but you can pack on a little bit more muscle that can be advantageous in the
Well,
next level if
yeah,
you
and
want.
I we should mention that I think he will. He's only 20 years old right now. Like I've got to believe by the time he's 23, 24 years old, he gets into an NFL weight program. I mean, he's never going to be Anquan Bolden or AJ Brown or any of those type of receivers, but is it realistic to think he could get to 182 pounds like 3 years in the league? Like, I don't think that's a stretch and not really lose any of his quickness. Now, you're right. Like, there were times on tape where some physical cornerbacks gave him some problems, especially against press. I think the hope is, Kate, that you get him into an offense where you could stack him like as a slot receiver or behind a big receiver, kind of the way that the Dolphins use Tyreek Hill. Remember last year where Mike McDaniel was putting Tyreek Hill like where the tight end would lined up or right behind a tight end so you couldn't press him or jam him. I think you have to have that kind of plan with Xavier Worthy. But I think to your point, I think it is realistic to assume that he is going to get at least a little bit stronger in the NFL.
And that's going to help him, I think, in a big way. That's also probably going to do wonders for his dynasty value, especially if he lands in the right situation. Now, I will say, out of all these wide receivers that we've talked about, Xavier Worthy is a guy that I could see his value fluctuating a bit depending on landing spot, depending on scheme,
Yes.
and
Yes.
depending on how he's going to be used and in what situation. So, Xavier Worthy is a very interesting prospect, I think, especially because his advanced metrics are kind of interesting. They're a little spotty, they're a little bit all
Ooh.
over the place, but they're strong in the areas that you would expect. But also, like, there's, I think, a really wide range of outcomes that could land him among the top receivers in this class on a NFL career standpoint, or could kind of flop,
Oh,
depending.
that's a little tease. We're going to get to his advanced numbers next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing that you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run, take a nap? How about read a book? A lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that extra thing into your life is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters most so that you can go and do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know about Locked On Sports Today. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate, let's dive into the advanced numbers here with Xavier Worthy, because you teased it at the right before the segment. Little spotty.
Little spotty, but again, like I said before the break, they are strong in the areas that you would expect for his profile. Let's dig right in. So over the 2023 season, where he truly embraced the role as a wide receiver one in the offense, 90th percentile in terms of separation percentage, 83rd percentile in yards after the catch. Those are two areas that you would think, yes, he is going to absolutely dominate with that, play speed, with that ability to separate because of the play speed. 53rd percentile in yards per route run, 6th percentile in contested catch percentage, which
Yeah, we know that.
again just totally plays into all of these areas that you would expect him to be strong and you would expect him to be weak. Now, I do want to mention one stat in particular, 18.4 breakout age. So breakout age is the age defined by their beginning of their college football season when they first posted a dominator rating above 20%. So that is very good. In fact, 18.4, 97th percentile. He broke out as a true freshman at Texas, 981 receiving yards and 12 receiving touchdowns. Also had some experience on special teams that year. You love to see that early breakout age. What you don't love to see is some regression in the season to follow. It slipped off a little bit, saw a decrease in his touchdown production, a decrease in yards per reception, receiving yards, target share, catch rate. Um,
I
so
can
like
explain a little bit of that, though. So there was multiple quarterback injuries during the 2022 season. Everybody remembers Quinn Ewers getting hurt in the Alabama game. Xavier Worthy also was dealing with an ankle injury. He played through it, but not excusing it. I'm just explaining a little bit of why you saw the drop in the numbers. But to me, Kate, the most impressive part, though, is go look at like the history of true freshman receivers scoring double-digit touchdowns in like a major conference, and it's almost like zero. Like, it's so rare to get somebody that can do that. That's what's so encouraging to me, is you're getting somebody who produced for 3 years at a major school like Texas. And yeah, there was some drop off in year 2, but for the most part, pretty solid producer every year.
pretty solid producer. And again, like I can't overstate what he did as a true freshman in 2021 enough. Ranked 77th percentile in yards per route run, yards after the catch per reception, and separation percentage or better in each of those metrics, which to see that kind of production in a major program the second you hit the football field, I think showcases just how natural a wide receiver he is and how naturally he plays the position.
I want to go into a couple more numbers again with some of the advanced stuff that you posted. To me, the stuff that really matters is the separation percentage, right? He's just getting open all the time. And if you extend that window from not just the 2023 season, but all 3 seasons that he was there, it's actually in the 95th percentile, 6th best in the country during the last 3 years. So like he gets open all the time. And then it doesn't matter whether it's against single coverage, he gets open a lot. Now, one of the things that is a little bit concerning is the yards after the catch numbers. Again, last year, 83rd percentile. Over the last 3 years, 59th percentile. Excuse me, 75th percentile. They're good. They're not elite. I think this is where my only concern is a little bit is, can he become more dynamic, like in the screen game? Because I don't see somebody who is going to bounce off tacklers. I think he's going to have to run by them. And that's fine. You can do that in the NFL. It's just one of the parts of his game I want to see him get a little bit better at. It's not a concern. It's not a weakness. It's not in the 3rd percentile like our guy, A.D. Mitchell was, who played at the same school as Xavier Worthy. But I should mention that, like, when Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell were on the field together, Worthy was the guy that outproduced him. Like, Worthy was the one that had more receiving yards. He was the more consistent receiver. I just think that's fascinating when you have 2 guys that could potentially go in the 1st round, and Worthy is the one who outproduced him pretty significantly.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. And I think again just speaks to the natural way he plays the position. Now, I do want to give like some credence also to the yards after the catch per reception, because like again, some of a lot of Worthy's plays have come from screens. Like he's been utilized, pretty heavily in the screen game. So part of that's on him, but I also think part of it, it has to do with ball placement. We've talked about the effect that ball placement from a, not perfectly accurate quarterback can have on ability for players to get yards after the catch. If you have to make an adjustment in the process of making a catch, it makes it a lot more difficult to get those yards after the catch, because you might have to stop, you might have to adjust your body, you might have to grab backwards. Like none of that is conducive.
Well, I want to mention this. There's a really good chart that came out yesterday. And I really apologize to whoever made. I cannot remember the name right now, but it was, what is every receiver's yards after the catch per reception in this class if you remove screens? Because for this exact reason, you could catch a screen, get tackled right away, and lose or basically get no yardage. Right? It's one of these plays where it's not very sticky when it comes to how good you are after the catch. And Xavier Worthy actually was the number 1 receiver in the class when you remove screens. So when you get him, where he's catching the ball on the move, already running, he's one of the best in the class. And I would like to see in the NFL a team utilize him more that way, rather than in the Wan'Dale Robinson, Rondale Moore role of, hey, we're just going to throw you bubble screen after bubble screen and go make a play for us.
Well, and I'm going to argue that type, like that stat is much more important than overall yards after the catch. Like, I mean, screens can be so dependent on blocking schemes and getting that aspect of the game right, setting up the screen correctly. I don't know. I'll throw the screen usage out of the window, and I'm going to say that for a guy like Xavier Worthy, who I think, when you get him in the threat of an open field, that's the stat I care about, is the yards after the catch per reception, not on screens.
I found it. It's from Football Insights. So this is all the receivers in the class. If you remove just the screens, Brock Bowers is actually number 1, 7.6 yards after the catch per reception. And then it's Malachi Corley at 5.6 and Xavier Worthy at 5.6, which, I mean, Corley is the best yak receiver in the class. Xavier Worthy right there next to him. So that to me is encouraging. I just hope that he doesn't get miscast in the NFL as, hey, he's a behind the line of scrimmage weapon, and that's how we're going to get him involved in the offense, because he is so much more than just a bubble screen player.
Yeah, I want to see him utilized in the slot. I don't think he's necessarily going to be physical enough to consistently play a role on the outside. I still think you can use him to some extent on the outside, but I think in the slot, getting him mismatched, like you said earlier, against some of those linebackers, that is the ultimate physical mismatch. Xavier Worthy being covered by a linebacker, you're gonna be able to maximize those yards after the catch and be the perfect cure for uh, that stat.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some NFL comps because there's some really good ones out there. And let's talk about his dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel is making it even more exciting to get in on the action because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $200 that you can use to bet on the college basketball tournament, MLB, NBA, NHL, and so much more. I had a blast watching Iowa LSU last night. Iowa, little check cash from FanDuel. Thanks. Shout out to FanDuel. Just visit fanduel.com/locked-on and make your first bet a big win with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. On tomorrow's show, we've got Matt Williamson to answer some of your Twitter questions. So make sure that you send them into us at Kate Majuk, at Marcus_Mosier. But let's talk comps in dynasty value for Xavier Worthy. Right now, Kate, where is Xavier Worthy being drafted among receivers?
Let's talk among the rookie wide receiver class because we've reviewed several of these guys so far. Right now, he's coming in via consensus Fantasy Pros Dynasty rookie wide receiver rankings here at wide receiver 6. So, behind the top prospects that we've discovered, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, Brian Thomas Jr., Troy Franklin, who we haven't gotten yet. I think that's going to be on next week's show. And then Xavier Worthy at number 6, notably 2 spots higher than AD Mitchell. How are you feeling about Xavier Worthy at 6? Because I'm going to argue closer to wide receiver 5 over Troy Franklin personally.
Yeah, I agree. I have him 5 and I have AD Mitchell 6. And those two are really close for me. I would rather gamble on Xavier Worthy just because I think the speed is rare. And if the off chance that he does get matched up with a really creative offensive coordinator, I think you could see him have a Jaylen Waddle type impact. And that leads me to my comp, Kate, is I think there's a very good chance that he could be Jaylen Waddle in the NFL. If you remember what Waddle, kind of Waddle coming into the NFL back in 2021, he was 5'9.5". He was 180 pounds. Now that's an unofficial weight because there was no combine that year. I got to believe that Jaylen Waddle was actually a little bit lighter than that. I think that's the type of role he could be in the NFL. And we've seen Jaylen Waddle. He's been a top 10 dynasty receiver for the last 2 or 3 years because the speed is so rare. But the comp that I saw when I watched him was DeSean Jackson, especially like early DeSean Jackson when he was playing with the Philadelphia Eagles. DeSean Jackson, 5'10". So he's not that 5'8", Tutu Atwell, Tank Dell size. He's a legit 5'10", came in at 169 pounds and ran a 4.35. Now, Worthy's faster. He's a little bit lighter. But I think in terms of play style, that's what he reminds me of. He's a legitimate deep threat who has good enough hands, great ball tracking, and he could run a full route tree. He's not just a go receiver. You can have him run comebacks and slants and all that kind of stuff. But his best work is going to be as a downfield receiver, just where you have to account for him on every play. You have to cover every blade of grass because he's that fast. I think a DeSean Jackson type of receiver is what Xavier Worthy reminds me of.
Yeah, and I think they win in very similar ways, like just getting behind the defense and making sure they can't catch up. And I mean, for context, we're looking at DeSean Jackson. If that comp comes to fruition, we saw DeSean Jackson post 5 1,000 receiving yard seasons, 2 seasons with 9 receiving touchdowns. And again, probably even more impressive for me, multiple seasons, 2 seasons with 15 plus fantasy points per game in full PPR format. So that turns out to be a very fantasy relevant asset. Now, I think long term, what we're looking at for Xavier Worthy is probably somewhere of a weekly wide receiver 2 with a ton of wide receiver 1 upside on any given week. how does that feel for you in terms of, expectations,
Good.
valuation? Eh, Maybe a little bit higher, again, depending on landing spot and depending on how he fits into the scheme.
That's the thing is it's going to depend on the landing spot. Does he go to a team that's going to give him plenty of downfield targets? Does he go to a division that's going to be more prone to shootouts? You and I were talking pre-show, like if he goes to like an AFC North team and he's having to deal with some more physical defenses, some bad weather, I'm not sure that's the best fit. But you put him in the AFC South where you're playing good weather games and playing in domes a majority of the year. And I love it. Like if he's the number 2 receiver to Michael Pittman with the Colts, and it's just Anthony Richardson launching him 70-yard bombs down the field, could he be T.Y. Hilton? Sure. Like maybe that's possible, right? So I want to see him in a situation like that where he's with a creative coach or creative offensive coordinator and in an offense that is going to give him plenty of opportunities to make plays down the field. I think his dynasty value in week-to-week ceiling is a little bit more dependent on landing spot than, let's say, a Brian Thomas or Rome Odunze. But I still really like him, and I think he's a good value at wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6.
Yeah, I think wide receiver 5 is where I'm landing right now. And what gives him the edge over Troy Franklin, again, kind of a lankier, skinnier build. Like I just think that when we're looking at the natural ability to play the position, that's what's giving Xavier Worthy the edge over me. It's not necessarily the athleticism. It's not the combine testing. It's his natural ability as a
Yes.
receiver. And I do think that, again, in the right scheme, like he is going to be an extremely productive receiver. And I'm saying like he has, enough height on him that if he puts on some muscle at the next level, the size and strength concerns might not even be an issue.
Yeah, and I want to mention, like, I do think he's a natural receiver. He's not the most natural receiver. He's not Marvin Harris or Junior or Roma Dunze. I think he's just far more natural than some of the other speed receivers that we've
Yes.
seen come out over the last couple of years. Like, I'll give you an example. Jameson Williams. I think he is a much more natural receiver than Jameson Williams was coming out of Alabama. I thought he was really more of a one-trick pony where you're throwing the ball down to the field to him or you're giving him jet sweeps. I think you can run a regular route tree with Xavier Worthy. He's not Tyquan Thornton or anything like that. And I think that's what makes him, to me, a first-round prospect.
I love it. I'm
All right.
I'm very excited to see where Xavier Worthy lands because I'm sure before the draft we're going to get around to some wide receiver ranking episodes, and Xavier Worthy is probably the guy in this tier 2 of wide receivers that's going to have maybe the most fluctuation in his dynasty value pending landing spot.
Don't be surprised if he ends up going much higher in the NFL draft than anybody anticipates. Like, I could see him going to Miami at pick 21. Like Mike McDaniel just couldn't resist. We mentioned the Colts.
The
It
speed.
wouldn't be surprising if the Colts looked at him and said, "Hey, he's just a better fit in our offense than AD Mitchell. We already have a guy that's 6'4" and that does the short to intermediate stuff. We need the home run speed." So keep an eye on Xavier Worthy's draft stock because I do think that's going to impact his dynasty value quite a bit. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen of the day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.